right, y'all ready? Oh, so oh, hold on. I need to turn. We'll be ready in just a moment.
Yeah. Which one is the button to turn it on? Is this on? Ooh, I think it's on. A little closer to my face. Like this? Okay. Can you hear me? Like that. That good?
Sound. Too loud.
Closer to your mouth.
How about now? Now? Yeah? Cool.
That's good.
Yeah.
I feel so fancy.
I'll introduce you.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. So, I'll be quick because this is their day. But back in January, I got this email from this fella, Craig Ford, saying, hey, I'm teaching this class at St. Norbert called Black Theology, and I'd like your congregation to be a part of it. I want to send some students your way as they learn about black theology and what a lived theology looks like in our world. I want to send them your way to do a presentation for your congregation. And I said, that sounds awesome. And I don't think that Dr. Ford knew exactly what any of this was going to look like. I sure didn't. But I'm like, that sounds great. And for a couple months now, we have had Joe, Drew, Kelsey, and Taylor, in that order, coming and visiting in worship a few times. And they've spoke one-on-one with some people in the congregation, as well as Men on His Mission. Men on His Mission, thank you for buying them breakfast. Way to go. That's if you're ever meeting with college students, buy them food. Okay, that's the correct thing to do. But it's also, I've been blessed to get to go to their classes a handful of times, and the conversation that Dr. Ford leads them in, the questions that he asked to draw out their knowledge, it's really been a blessing to me. And so today they are going to have a presentation on racial justice for us. And so thank you all for showing up, and you are on.
Thank you, Pastor Josh, for that. So first, we just want to introduce ourselves because, like Pastor Josh mentioned, we've come to a couple of worships and we've met one-on-one with some people, but I know that the entire congregation may not know of us. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Drew. I'm a first-year student, political science major, and a theology minor.
My name is Joe. I'm a sophomore at S&C, and I am an English major and Peace and Justice minor.
I'm Kelsey. I'm a first-year student. I'm a psychology major and a biology minor.
I'm Taylor. I'm a senior, and I'm a psychology major and a double minor of sociology and peace and justice.
We also just wanted to mention that being students of Black theology, it's a class that we get a lot of questions about what does it mean to be a student of Black theology. This is the first time this course has been offered at St. Norbert, so this course has been kind of divided into 3 different ways. We started, Taylor and I were able to go on a trip this January to Alabama. We went to a Black church, and we went from Montgomery to Birmingham. We were in Selma, as well as Tuskegee a few days. Tuskegee University. And in that part of the course, in the first part, we were just kind of learning the institutional racism that we have, from the psychology of racism to the history of it and to the societal construct that we still have today. And then we started getting an introduction into the Black theology, the concept of it, and we've currently been learning about about how Black theology made its voice in movements from Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement to the Malcolm X movement to the Black Panthers. And so our presentation today, we want to offer a different perspective, maybe something that you haven't been too familiar with about a Black Jesus, not necessarily in the sense that Jesus is trying to become more historically accurate, but that Jesus stands for one of the oppressed. And it's something that I think as Christians, all of us should take into consideration. So we just hope to offer a new perspective and work in light with what you guys already have going on here in the congregation. So. Our presentation will be divided into 4 different ways, and first we'll talk about Jesus and the oppression, and his reconciliation with the oppressed. And I would start with the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 31 through 46, which is referred to as the parable of the goats and the sheep, or the judgment of the kingdom, which portrays Jesus in kind of a different light, one that warrants kind of a different mission from the church, I think. In the story, it is said that Jesus, once he sits on the throne of his glory, will split the people like a shepherd splits the goats and the sheep. He'll put one group on the right, and on the other left, and other people on the left. On the right, he blesses and allows into the kingdom those people, for he explains that I was hungry. When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. And when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you took care of me. And when I was in prison, you visited me. But those on the right that have been blessed by the Lord asked him, when did we do this for you? When did we feed you when you were hungry? When did we give you drink when you were thirsty? When did we visit you when you were isolated in prison? Jesus answered to them, just as you did to the least of these, who were the members of my family, you did for me. Now for those on the left, Jesus explained that they are punished, for when I was hungry, you gave me no food. When I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. When I was a stranger, you did not welcome me. When I was naked, you did not give me clothing. And when I was sick and in prison, you did not care for me. You did not visit me. Well, again, those separated on the left-hand side explain, when was it that I saw you when you were hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick in prison? When did we see you like this? Why should we get punished for something we weren't even aware of? Well, Jesus explains to them again, just as you did not do it for one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. In other words, Jesus says, when you serve the oppressed and the marginalized, you are serving me. When you don't, you are oppressing me. And so Black theologian James Cone adds into this argument that in Christ, God willfully enters into the human affairs and enters into solidarity with the oppressed. That the suffering of the oppressed becomes God's oppression. That their despair becomes divine despair. And it doesn't take a very thorough examination into identifying who the most oppressed in today's society are.
So who are the oppressed in today's society? The Black poverty rate in 2022 was 17.1%, about 49% higher than the average rate for all races. 51.1% of all eviction filings are against Black renters, despite only 18.8% of renters in America being Black. In 2023, only 34% of Black adults have a college degree compared to the 50% of white adults. And in our jails and prisons, Black people are both overrepresented and stay longer than their white counterparts. Even the rates of Black women dying during childbirth is substantially higher than that of white women, 2.6 times. Racism is alive and well in America, and not necessarily in individualized prejudiced behaviors, but instead in institutionalized systems of Black oppression and disadvantage. Stamped out from the beginning, author Ibram X. Kendi declares in describing the state of Black people in Western civilization, it may even begin with the idea of race. What do we even mean when we say race? Well, author Akil Mbembe describes how race really functions as a tool of power and control, shaping how we perceive, categorize, and treat within society certain groups that we classify as a race. With that, the Western consciousness of the Black race was one that was meant to be dominated and controlled, that is exploitable for profit, and one that suffers and is oppressed. Theories began to develop that helped justify the oppression of the Black race. In 322 BCE, Aristotle developed the climate theory, promoting the idea that hot climates, such as in Africa, produced intellectually, physically, and morally inferior people who were ugly and lacked the capacity for freedom and self-government, meaning that they would need someone to control them. What's more, curse theory, or the curse of Ham, was developed in the year 923 and alleged that God had permanently cursed slavery and ugliness into the very nature of the African person. These ideas not only justified the mind of the white oppressor, the Atlantic slave trade, and the subsequent centuries of slavery, but is also very much alive today. As President Franklin D. Roosevelt was putting together the New Deal programs that would lift those worst affected by the Depression up, the programs were continuously applied unequally to Black Americans. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, which served the purpose of saving mortgages that were pending foreclosure, would refuse to rescue those mortgages of African Americans, viewing them as poor risks. The Federal Housing Administration would insure bank mortgages, but to be eligible meant passing an appraisal to make sure that the loan was a low risk of default. As you can imagine, Blacks were denied FHA mortgage insurance on account of being a risk. When coming back from service in World War II, many African Americans were denied application. Hello? Sorry. Were denied applications for government guaranteed mortgages that were provided by the Veterans Administration, simply due to race. Not only this, but the FHA, along with other New Deal programs, played such a massive role in creating the segregation that we live with today. Oftentimes, when entire subdivisions were being constructed, usually suburban subdivisions, the only way to receive an FHA insurance on loans was to make the subdivision only available for whites. There would be housing available for Blacks, although segregated and not of the same quality of housing for the whites. The result has been that Blacks have been placed together in urban slums with little to no opportunity of upward mobility after losing out on the generational wealth that white families have been able to accumulate with the New Deal programs. The oppressive state for African Americans is perhaps most alive today in our criminal justice system. It may surprise you that most illegal drug users and dealers are white, yet 3/4 of those imprisoned for drug offenses are actually either Hispanic or Black. In 2000, Black Americans constituted between 80 to 90% of those sent to prison for drug charges in 7 different states. In 15 states, Blacks were imprisoned on drug charges at a rate of 20 to 57 times higher than that to their white counterparts. Many attempt to justify the mass incarceration of Black individuals by frantically pointing out the shadow of violent crime that is soon to come over us. 77% of Americans believe that violent crime is at an all-time high. However, violent crime is actually dropping precipitously, seeing a 12.2% decline from 2022 to 2023. So are we hiding behind this myth of the insurgence of violent crime merely to imprison and keep quiet Black people in America? In the New Deal era, churches were not only segregated themselves and are actively still segregated, but they are also actively work towards maintaining a neighborhood of segregation. Lots of times it was reverends, priests, pastors, heading the effort to restrict Black people from purchasing homes in the areas designated as white. In 1947, Los Angeles Reverend W. Clarence Wright personally sued an attempt to evict a Black war veteran who had just moved into the restricted area. When this lawsuit failed, Reverend Wright's church still kept their tax subsidy. It was reasoned by these reverends, pastors, and priests that allowing colored people into their housing vicinity would mean, quote, utter ruin for many people who have mortgaged their homes to the FHA. And not only that, but it would jeopardize the safety of many of our white girls, end quote. Even the church placed the value of mortgage over that of the Black person. The broader question then becomes, is there any group that has faced that much oppression in America as the Black person? From being stolen from their homeland of Africa and subsequently sold into slavery, then being freed from slavery but still denied the opportunity of prosperity they had longed for. Therefore, it is no question that Jesus, in accordance with the Gospels, is in solidarity with the oppressed Black people in the Black community. But is this enough?
Jesus does not merely identify, but he also liberates. James Cone writes, Jesus' work is essentially one of liberation, and that though the incarnate, God becoming a slave, Jesus opens us up to a new understanding of human life and existence that were previously inaccessible for us. This allows the church, as the Jamaican theologian Noel Leo Erskine states, to speak with specificity to people in the light of real conditions and needs to confront them in real situations in which they live. Erskine even goes a step further when he says that to be faithful to Christ, the church must be able to live and announce salvation in all dimensions. That is to say that Jesus' identification with the oppressed mandates that we as Christians have an obligation to help to liberate our oppressed brothers and sisters in Christ. The mistake of the modern church, Cohn writes, is to identify the work of God's Spirit in the believer either with private moments or of ecstasy or with the individual purification from sin.
Liberation and Black theology in action. As enslaved Africans were brought to the Americas and subjected to Christianity, one of the points of congruence behind African religion and Christianity was the idea of spirit. That is, the idea of spirit possession that was prevalent in African religion continued its prevalence in the form of the Holy Spirit of the Christian Trinity. Now, when slave masters would introduce Christianity to their slaves, using it to coerce their slaves into subordination, the Spirit took on a new role. The Spirit began to play a role of empowerment for the Black slaves, and it would bring liberation, they believed. After a long day's work in the fields with both the sun and white masters beating down on them, Christian slaves would still become empowered by the Spirit to lead worship late at night, often secluding themselves deep into the woods. Oftentimes, they could not contain their excitement as these late-night worship sessions, for they believed the Spirit had infected them, and they would simply shout in such excitement. You see, to them, to be affected by the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Christ means that God and Jesus were working out their will in the lives of humans. It meant that God was actively involved in the world in which suffering was so immense, and it brought excitement to the slaves that God was going to free them from their bondage, just as God had freed the Israelites from Pharaoh and from Egypt. Though it became harder and harder to believe, many slaves did believe that salvation was coming for them in this life, not merely in the afterlife. That now, in the present, they would get to taste a world in which their oppression was absent, and that this would be through the work of the Spirit. This idea birthed liberation theology, which contends that God's salvation is not merely confined to the afterlife, but rather is present in any contemporary movement that combats oppression. The Black Panthers, therefore, acted according to God's will. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference acted according to God's will. Malcolm X, an American Muslim, even acted according to God's will, though many Christians don't act according to God's will in the context of liberation theology. Indeed, many Christians became caught up between the dichotomy of the particular and universal. It has been deciphered that God and Jesus are for the oppressed in a very particular sense. We have discussed Christ identifies with the Black person, who is really oppressed in every which way. Does this mean that Christ means nothing to me or to you? We aren't Black and face nowhere near as much oppression. Does Jesus identify with us? Is Black theology even Christianity? These are perplexing questions, certainly, but questions that I feel have one simple answer, that as Christians, our universal salvation is contingent upon particular salvation. We cannot be saved, nor content, nor happy if our neighbors are oppressed, beaten, and shackled.
So the resurrection of Jesus into the ghettos. Another thing that the modern church may struggle with is that it tells the story of Jesus saving the oppressed as confirmed into the first century. As it has been demonstrated, Jesus' work lives on through the work of the Spirit, but it lives on because Jesus was resurrected. Salvation for the oppressed did not die at the cross, but instead lives on. Today, Cohn argues Jesus is in the ghettos of urban America, where people are living on the brink of existence. In the 1800s then, Jesus was in the fields of the plantation, standing up to that oppression. This is why in Black theology, God and Jesus are seen as friend. God may tell the slave working in the field or the Black single mother struggling to raise her children in the heart of the ghettos, remember, I know the meaning of rejection because in Christ I was rejected. I know the meaning of physical pain because I was crucified, meaning the meaning of death because I died. And so it is common for many Black Christians to see Jesus as Black.
But why might you see Jesus as Black? Well, for one, Jesus was on earth. He had a form of particularity. In the incarnate form, God not only took the side of an oppressed man, but he became a Jewish man, very specifically at a time when Jewish people were under the oppressive control of the Romans. In this time, God, through Jesus, identified with the most oppressed in society. And today, through the resurrection of Jesus, God also identifies with the most oppressed in society. Therefore, Black representation of Jesus symbolizes Jesus' solidarity with the oppressed, not only then, but today. Secondly, building off of that, Black representation of Jesus reminds us of our Christian duty to fight alongside Christ in the liberation of the poor and the oppressed. That is, that we should fight for the particular salvation in order to achieve our own universal salvation. Let then Black representation of Jesus help guide you towards the end goal of universal salvation for all of us. Finally, Black representation of Jesus, very specifically for this church, might create a more welcoming atmosphere in congruence with the perception of Jesus as a friend that many Black slaves had. Many young people grow disillusioned today with the church, predominantly because the church stands on social issues. But Black representation of Jesus provides quite literally a different representation of that. It shows that not only is Christianity congruent with social and racial justice, but that to be Christian means that one must work towards liberation of the socially and the racially oppressed. With that, before we enter into conversation, we would just like to share some of our own personal experiences that might be similar to what you guys have experienced, but going through this course might be a little different. So with that, Taylor?
So one moment for me, we were learning about like the history of the U.S., some of the facts that I was sharing earlier, about things that have been excluded from my previous knowledge. Not only excluded from that, but learning history and actually keeping certain parts of history out of it. So for example, I learned about the New Deal, but I never knew that in making more jobs and housing projects, Black people were kept in oppression and in separate neighborhoods under the same laws. There were a lot of traditions and stories that I've heard of, I had never heard of, such as religious groups called hush harbors during slavery. Learning the secrecy that surrounds the topic of Black history and Black theology was very shocking, but also not shocking at the same time. I knew a lot of these subjects tended to be brushed under the rug, but I wasn't aware of just how much I didn't know.
One of my moments that I experienced is growing up, my parents decided to enroll both me and my younger brother into a private Catholic school. That is where I spent most of my schooling now at this point, as I'm still enrolled in a private Catholic school. I attended that school starting with preschool and continued all the way to the end of 6th grade, which the summer going into my 7th grade year, my parents informed us that we would be moving to a public school because tuition is pretty penny. It wasn't until getting to a public school that I started to realize how little diversity was present in the first part of my schooling. Fast forward to the first day of spring semester this year, and I'm sitting in day 1 of Black theology, and I'm being taught about white privilege and all the different ways it can be present in my life. I remember sitting there listening to Dr. Ford, our professor, and thinking to myself, I never considered myself a person who discriminated against another person, and I wouldn't consider myself racist. However, it was in that realization that I also realized that as much as I may have never personally discriminated against another human being, as I'm sure none of you have, I lived and participated in a society that did not exercise a message of diversity that allowed people of color to feel comfortable in my same environment. So as much as I wasn't actively being racist or discriminating against anyone to my knowledge, I also wasn't actively trying to stop the society and the world I lived in from doing all of those things.
So for me, I grew up in a rural American town, like some of you probably have, and if you are familiar with rural America, you also know that there are even few racial diversities. I could probably count on one hand the amount of people who had a different background than I did. Two. And with that, a lot of it was hidden under the rug, much like Joe and Taylor's experience was history wasn't really explained to us. I grew up right by a native reservation, maybe an hour from my place, and that was kind of just hidden. Same with Black theology. It didn't really come to my attention until I took Dr. Ford's first theological class. When I really realized the importance of it, I'd witnessed firsthand people who were oppressed, but they were always white people. And so learning this way, I realized just how much of a privilege I had just based on the color of my skin, which sounds awful, but it was kind of the true realization. An important part for me was learning how American Christians had kind of stripped African Americans from their history and kind of took their religion away from them and forced Christianity
realize that racism is more than just a few individual acts of prejudice, that it's something more, that it's something more systemic, and like everybody here, that kind of part is taken away from you. But even after I realized that, there's still just so much conflict that happens in your brain. I think as a white person, you have to deal with the guilt of it, the part of it, but then you have to deal with the realization how you move forward. So for me, we were on our trip in Alabama, and we were going, and this is in Montgomery, and we were in the Legacy Museum, which attempts to show how, even though there has been a lot of progress, that really the same structure of domination persists. It goes from slavery into mass incarceration today, and that's what the museum tried to show. And so as we were walking through this, I remember I had a thought that kind of creeped into my head, and I was just like, well, why do black people have to make this an issue still? Which at the time I even knew it was a bad thought, and I knew the answer to it, why it was wrong. But I think this highlights that, and this is what a reading of ours had to do with the psychology of racism, is that as a white person who's trying to come out of that, there's so much tension in your mind. There's you trying to feel good again about yourself, even though you know you live in a system where you have benefited at the expense of other people. And so, and Dr. Beverly Tatum, the one who wrote this, calls this reintegration, that your previous feelings of guilt turn into anger and fear towards people of color. And so even though I knew this was wrong, I really couldn't stop myself from kind of thinking about that. It just crept up, and I think this shows that racism is something that dilutes not only, dilutes the white person's mind too, who is supposed to have benefited from it. So if racism can be solved, if it ever really can be, it's something that not only will be particularly beneficial for the black people, but it's also beneficial for us, because it kind of dilutes our mind and makes us feel probably a false sense of superiority, but also just, I think, guilt that can really affect your mind and cause tension. So with that, we'd like to open up to any questions or discussion.
If you have a question, I'm going to invite you to use the microphone. Again, this is being live streamed and archived on our YouTube channel. So this will make sure that anybody who's watching can hear what our conversation is about. Does anybody have any questions?
Or comments?
Yeah.
Anything.
We know it was a lot of information.
Yeah.
It's just great. Which is why we sort of ended with our own personal experiences, because we don't want to just be a group that comes into your congregation, your church, and just preaches to you this information. Like, what are you supposed to do with that, you know? We wanted to share our own personal experiences that maybe some of you guys can relate to. Maybe some of you guys have had similar thoughts to Drew. I know I have, or some of you have experienced. I know we talked to a couple members who also grew up in predominantly white Catholic church, like schools. So it's like, you guys can maybe relate to certain aspects that we shared, so that's why we wanted to end with that, just to share some relatability with you guys.
Anyone? Yeah, Diane. Deb, I will come back to you. And you don't have to hold it particularly close.
Okay. Excellent job. I'm just kind of wondering if you touch on affirmative action at all. I mean, it's under attack right now, saying we don't need it anymore. I'm just wondering what your experiences or what you saw and conclusions you might have in regard to that.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes with what I was talking about a little bit, like at the end of my personal experience, is that racism also then comes into the mind of a white person, and they all of a sudden think that this is reverse racism, and that they're instead oppressed. When an example of affirmative action, which I think just further shows in my mind how like it dilutes your mind, that you could think something like that. So we talked about it from that perspective of the psychology of race predominantly, that yeah, a lot of people, white people, think they're oppressed when something like affirmative action happens, that they don't see it for what it's standing for, the fact that they call for black people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but maybe they don't have boots to pull them up.
All right, Debbie, here you go.
I was going to ask something different, but oh gosh, I don't know. You know, you say that if racism could be, an ending part you had about racism being solved, Do you have any ideas how that's gonna happen? Because to me, it seems like it's just getting worse and worse with the affirmative action stuff, where people feel fine and dandy about just saying horrible things about other people now.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys get any ideas on what can be done?
I
It's
think
a huge question.
Yeah, it is a huge question. I think one of the ways is kind of doing what we're doing right now, is that white people need to talk to other white people about this. The same author I've mentioned, Beverly Daniel Tatum, mentions that white allies need white allies, because first of all, a lot of black people aren't going to want to hear us talk about this, just because it brings up stuff for them. They probably aren't going to want to listen to it. But I think if we talk to each other about it, that leads to one step in it. Because the same author mentioned that white people need to feel good about their own identity first before they can look highly upon others and get towards the closest towards solving racism. And I still struggle with what that feels like, because you're not gonna feel good as a white person in like an egotistical sense, but you have to feel good about your own identity first to be able to appreciate the other. So I still don't know what that looks like. I'm hoping maybe someday I'll figure it out. But
Well, I think another thing too is, honestly, this kind of like Drew was saying, like this is a step right here.
Yeah.
Just it's gonna be a long process. Obviously, some of us we won't get to see the racism being solved. Hopefully we all do. Hopefully it's closer than we think it is. But kind of like you were saying, it is getting worse in some areas, or it's just not being addressed. And so it's a baby step process. And one of the first steps is something that we touched about in our presentation a little bit, but just bringing forth knowledge that we weren't originally taught. Let's reteach the New Deal and all of these things that were taught in our history classes, but let's teach them the correct way, and let's bring forth this knowledge that I guarantee you a lot of people didn't know. I'm guessing a lot of you didn't know about all of these housing statistics that Taylor talked about in her long speech in the middle there, but I didn't know about any of that. And so listening to that and then reading the book that we read for class, as well as other short excerpts that we've read over time, but then just being able to talk about these things and have these realizations and these aha moments together, kind of go through it together, talk about it as you're experiencing it, really conversation, which is what we're doing right now. This is a big step forward. And this is how, if we keep talking about these things and if we keep learning, that's how I feel like we are going to get to a better world for not just black people, but everybody.
Yeah, and I think going along with learning and starting with that, I think you guys are even doing work here, trying to become the RIC church. That's a step forward, and the work that Men on This Mission is doing, and the work that you do with We All Rise, those are steps forward, taking what you know and moving it forward into action.
One of the quotes that really stuck to me, we watched a Catholic Mass, and a Catholic priest in New York, he had labeled racism to be America's original sin, and still is the original sin. And with that, I feel as though even though we could keep fighting racism and keep progressing and moving forward with it, I don't think it's something that will be 100% abolished, because nothing really is. But more action you take, I feel like the more lessened it can be.
For sure.
I'm going to take this first, because once he gets the microphone, I won't have a chance. I think it was so interesting that you brought into one of my very favorite phrases is, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
And you've got to take that first step. On our way south several years ago, we went to Montgomery, and we went to the museum, and we saw the monuments, and it's life-changing. It really is. I commend you, and this was definitely a first step. I think they're baby steps. It wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 years ago I knew what Juneteenth was. Now, I have come into a group of people that thought Juneteenth was a homophobic celebration. Did not know. and you don't know what you don't know. So I commend you.
Exactly.
You talked about history, and we get embedded in history, and that's what we see it through our eyes. So I don't know if you're willing to share this, but when you walk into our church, into our, I guess we call it the lounge now, lobby, I guess, we call it a lobby? I called it a narthex, but that's my old history. Okay, thank you. And you see a white Jesus on the wall, which is a very historical picture. Did you have any personal reactions you could just share with us as an outsider, as we maybe can create conversation about our own history?
Yeah, when I saw it, it wasn't any different than what I had grown up seeing. And that was another thing that we've talked about, is what we started the class when we talked about our own personal experiences of like our upbringing. And so seeing that was not out of the norm for me. I guess I didn't even really think a lot of it until Pastor Josh brought it up and he didn't like it.
Well, I love the painting.
No, that's
I
what
love
I mean. I love the painting. It's a beautiful painting.
Yeah, I can kind of go off of that a little bit. I mean, like I said earlier, I grew up in a predominantly white Catholic church, and I attended white Catholic school. And I think I could say that I probably saw the same rotation of the same 4 pictures of Jesus. All were white. It's the same. I mean, you see the same pictures. Like when you Google Jesus, most of them come up white. And coming into this church for the first time, I looked at the picture, I looked at it, and I didn't give it a second thought, because it was something that I have seen basically every day of my life. It was comfortable. It was something that wasn't new to me, and it didn't stick out. That's kind of my personal experience with that. But then it's like, okay, I took a second look and I looked at it again, and I was like, this isn't really accurate. You know, like historically speaking, he would not have looked like that. And I mean, kind of just going based off of like what we were talking about earlier, where you don't know what you don't know. A lot of people don't know that Jesus would not have looked like that. And so it's talking about it and just bringing it up in conversation, honestly, to kind of try and step out of the comfortability that you feel when you look at that picture. So that way, when you do look at it for the first time in another church, you're like, nope, that's not right. So it's taking those first steps, and I guess I'm so at fault for it even today. Like I was saying, like I looked at it, didn't even give it a second thought. It's what I've grown up seeing. It's what I know, and it's comfortable. But my goal is to get out of the comfort. I want to be uncomfortable and make it a new comfort.
I think that's also a step, going back to like a question that was asked earlier, was like, how do we move forward? I think sitting with discomfort is a good way to do that. And it's because it's very easy to just stay in your way and feel comfortable. Because you feel comfortable, who doesn't want to feel comfortable? But moving towards that discomfort, I think, is also an important step.
Yeah, because I mean, change is scary. Nobody
Yeah.
likes it. I mean, if you do, I envy you, because you're probably like thriving in life right now. But yeah, I mean, I think all of us aren't really like, nobody likes change. It's uncomfortable, like we were saying. But at the end of the day, like change can be a really good thing.
Yeah.
You go through this experience, and at first you're really stressed because you don't know what's going to happen, right? It's unknown, it's scary. And then you come out the other side and you're like, wait a minute, that was one of the best experiences of my life.
That's kind of cool.
No matter what aspect change is happening in your life, right? Like change can be a good thing. So
I think this class has changed me. But when I first experienced of coming upon the white Jesus the white Jesus I just never was able to really connect with, because a lot of it is tied to him being called like a king from Europe. Like they would highlight Jesus as a king, a lord they would call him. And that Jesus I could never really get behind, because a lot of people see it as your personal Jesus, like a private Jesus that you would pray to if you want something, like a quick pro like maybe younger I would say like, I want a good grade on this, please Jesus, give me a good grade and I'll be good, or something like that.
you wanted grades, I wanted a Barbie doll.
Yeah, but
Maybe that's a little bit older. Yeah. More like high school.
yeah, but the white Jesus I just never was able really to connect with. But by taking this class, I was able to change my like entire perception, especially of this church of Christianity as something that you could use actually for good. Oftentimes it doesn't seem like it's that way, where you can be like a social justice advocate and also be Christian. It doesn't seem like those two go together very much. But through what I've seen with this church and through taking this class, I think that those two are like very much, not only are they connected, but like to be Christian, you should be involved in social justice. You should be. And I think that's what like a different variation of Jesus would offer, I think, is like a reminder of that versus the European king kind of Jesus.
Hello. I appreciate that last comment. My question is the makeup of your current class. How many students? What type of backgrounds possibly? And what's the next step? Is there another class you can take to give you more energy to continue your study? And also, are you going to still come to church here? Ha ha ha. And do you have more people you can bring with you? Because hearing your energy is great. Instead of being newer to the church since coming with the class, but we learn off of each other, right? And you, I look at it as I can take my time and try to dig, right, and try to find information. Where if you are given information in your classes, easy to share, easy for me to find, where I can put my effort into learning instead of trying to find what to learn, if that makes sense. So I know I said a lot. I do hope that we get to see your faces in church further, and thank you for doing this.
We were actually just talking about this like as we came in early today and took our seat in the pews and whatnot. We were like, guys, I think we need to come back when we come back after the summer. Just like
I don't know where I will be in the fall, so like that's
yeah, she's graduating. That's a different
I am
story.
graduating, so like it's up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, but no, we think it would be cool to come back because you guys just have created such a good community and you were all so welcoming to us and that was something we really appreciated too, is because this is a very big thing that we're talking about. It's controversial in a lot of aspects, and a lot of churches. I mean, Dr. Ford sent out emails to a couple of churches, and he did have churches respond saying, "No, we don't want this." And so for you guys to be so welcoming, and like I think the first time we were all here, we could not come in because so many of you guys were coming to talk to us.
Yeah.
And it was so great.
It was very cool.
Yeah.
To go back to like our class makeup, I'd say there's how many? 17 of us. 16 of us.
16 and Dr. Ford.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Hopefully the Black Theology class will go again. More students can go on the civil rights tour that Drew and I went on, and even just taking more theology classes. Becoming a peace and justice minor is very cool. It's interdisciplinary minor is really cool. You can just take all different classes. Yeah. Dr. Ford created, with the help of another professor, that minor. I think it's very, very cool.
Well, there's something that we can do to relate to St. Norbert that we think is a very powerful class and should continue. Please let us know, because this is great. That's in just a couple miles from us that it's happened, so let us know.
There are like other classes to teach you more history. So first semester I actually took African history, and my parents' general response was, "Why?"
Yeah.
Like they looked at me like, "Why?" I'm like, "Well, I needed an elective. This sounded interesting." So I took it, and then I ended up really liking it, other than like the essay writing. You know, and then originally I was also enrolled to study like racial injustice or racial and gender studies. So you're supposed to do a writing class. I don't like writing, so I dropped that. And that one was predominantly studying like the racial and like more focused on gender, like the differences of gender and the discrimination amongst them. And it was also a community service. I have no idea what they're doing, but they're probably having a great time.
Yeah, this course is called a community engaged course. So we go to class, but then we also work with the community, and you are our community.
I think it's cool because right now we have so much excitement around. Like, I think our class and the excitement that comes with it is spreading around campus. There's a lot of people that are learning that this class was offered. I think a lot of my friends, they're like, "You're in a tell them, Pastor Josh mentioned this, like the discussion that we have in class every day, it's just so cool to be a part of. It really is. And whether that's me learning brand new things that I didn't know, or stating my personal experiences with my classmates, or just talking about whatever. We do daily check-ins every time, and those will normally last 30 minutes. And we're like, how's your day today? Like we just take the time to get to know each other. And so this class truly has become like a little family and our own little community. And so I think Dr. Ford has a lot of excitement about like where he wants to continue with this class, and then also possible classes in the future. And so I think if we can somehow keep the excitement rolling on campus, then I think there's going to be more classes like this in state or brought into our community and the campus in the future. So
I'll say one more thing about one thing on campus. I'll just promo a little bit. It's called the Norman Miller Center for Peace, Justice, and Public Understanding, and I work there. That's why I'll promo it. It's no big deal or anything. I love it there. We put on events all the time promoting peace, justice, and public understanding, and they're open to the community almost 95% of the time. And I think that center is really important. We do a lot of things there, so that's cool, and I'll send things along. I mean, we were supposed to have the Miller lecture this spring, and that did not happen. Yeah. But maybe next time. There's a fall and a spring.
Hi, I grew up in a community way up north, and there wasn't a lot of diversity. Our diversity was with Native Americans and other minorities, and I find this draws more attention to that. Did you talk about other minority situations at all in your classroom or whatever? I mean, there's a great many different minority situations in the United States, and I was just wondering if that ever came up.
Yeah, we discussed a little bit on like mainly Hispanics. Native Americans wasn't really touched on in this class in particular, but Dr. Ford in his like the theology 117, like the first class you have to take, he did touch like this. Our campus was all originally like Oneida Reservation and Oneida land, and I think that's not really emphasized, like shown that it's on there. So there's definitely that part. Like I said, I grew up in a rural American town. There was more Hispanics that I was familiar with, so I saw like that pushback from people more so than like the Black Americans and Native Americans.
And I think with the Black Jesus, it's not necessarily that Jesus has to be black. I think it's a separate conversation talking about the historical accurate Jesus versus what we're talking about the Black Jesus, because what we're talking about with the Black Jesus is that Jesus will stand for the most oppressed. And yeah, Black people definitely are the only oppressed, marginalized group in America. So Jesus very well could be in this mind. He could be a Native American. He could be Hispanic. So even though we mainly touched on the particularity of the Black person in America, it could go many different ways. And it gets back to the idea between like the particular and the universal. When you take up a group with the particular, then it'll be universal for all of us. Universal salvation for all of us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm interested in the criminal justice part of it because I do prison ministry. So what do you do at your office that you work at? What?
Oh, the Norman Miller Center?
Yeah.
Well, we do a lot of things. We put on our events. We have a fall lecture and then a spring lecture, and we just do different things throughout the semester. So like last semester we did work with the International Day of Peace, with the, what was it called? We did it in Peace and Justice.
Oh, I was literally, I
The
don't know.
Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, the
Yep.
Sustainable Development Goals. That was embarrassing. We did a lot of work around that. There's also a class that's taught about mass incarceration, and I have taken that one, and I have just like a particular interest in that as well, especially like juvenile detention. I think that's really fascinating.
Is it just for St. Norberts?
The class is like a class, but all of our events at least your name on our email list, so we can get people, we hope to get community involved in all of our events. But
Another event that our school just recently did that was open to the community is I think the group organization is called Joshua.
Yes, Joshua.
Yeah, they came and I attended the lecture. It was like a panel discussion.
Yeah.
They had a panel in our school, in our library. It was open to the community. A lot of members came. And on the panel, there was Democrats, there was Republicans, there was somebody who had spent 25 plus years in prison. There was a mom who has a son in prison on the panel. There was social workers. This panel probably had I'd say 8 people, if I'm remembering correctly, and they just talked about the Green Bay Correctional Institution and basically how unfortunate, how damaging that institution is. And the man who had been in prison for 25 years spent a lot of his time in that institution, and so he was able to share his personal experiences, his story. And so basically it was give or take maybe 2.5 hour long discussion, but it was about mass incarceration. There was a lot of information that we learned, which was very interesting. But then it was also the audience members were able to ask questions while they were listening to the panelists talk, and then they would basically be in conversation similar to how we are right now, but it was just a way for us to talk about the problems of mass incarceration like you were getting at. And I hope that they come back and do more events with St. Norbert, because yes, it was a long presentation, but I would have sat there for another 3 hours because of how entertained I was and just how much information and knowledge I was consuming. And it truly was an eye-opening experience for sure.
You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
So if it's not shared with the community, it's not known. So kudos, you guys.
Yeah. Any other questions?
They deserve an A.
Dr. Ford, I agree. A's all around.
We also agree,
Yep.
Dr. Ford.
Yeah. I'll tell him.
I don't doubt that.
We actually have some questions that maybe you should consider on your own time to continue, but not necessarily ones that have answers, but something to consider from what we've presented today. One, how have you imagined Jesus before, and how has this changed in your life, or not changed at all? What is black theology? The question we often get a lot is why can't you just teach theology? Why does it have to be black theology?
Why just say black?
Right. Why is it important, and what is the difference between black theology and what we think as normal theology, which is usually white European theology? So, why is it important for Jesus to be represented as black if he's supposed to be more universally represented? And does it really even matter what his skin color is? And we got this question a lot too. Is there a difference between the historically Palestinian Jesus or a black Jesus? And in what ways have you experienced the Christianity that is antithetical to working for the liberation of societies most oppressed today? Have you gotten this, what Cohen would say, a modern church that is concerned with private moments of individual ecstasy rather than universal combating oppression? So those are some things you consider after this, and hopefully you have maybe more enlightened answer, hopefully. But that moving forward then, I think you guys already have such a good vision going on forth. I know RIC is planning on hosting another presentation after this, but then hopefully getting to a vote in September. So we hope you can remember this and what we talked about today for that. And also, definitely on your own time as a congregation, maybe getting more representation of a different color Jesus. It doesn't have to be just a black Jesus. It could be a native Jesus or a Hispanic Jesus. But the idea is still that Jesus is with the most oppressed, and that his work with the oppressed shines on us, work that we have to do as Christians for outreach, for combating liberation, combating oppression, and hoping for liberation in our own community. So, thank you, St. John Luther.
Before you go, I kept my mouth shut pretty much the whole time. pretty much. Just a couple of things that we've got going on here at St. John to kind of continue along with this work. One of the things is they read a lot of great books in their class, and I've gotten to check out snippets of them. There is one, I especially wanted to mention this as you, Diane, brought up the issue of affirmative action. One of the things that they spent considerable time learning about in their class is the ways that prejudice and racism exist in this country since its founding and continue to, is not just in the hearts and actions of individuals, but has been law. I mean, we have had racist policies written into the federal, state, and municipal governments of this country from the very beginning. We're going to have there's a great book that they read called The Color of Law that addresses this and how it has continued to today. Within the next week or two, we will have a few copies of it in the Racial Justice Library. If you don't want to wait for it to get into the Racial Justice Library, you can go to Amazon on your phone right now, and it'll be here like by 10 p.m. tomorrow, right? That's what it'll say, yeah? But we'll have a few of those. I know that our Synod Racial Justice team is actually planning a field trip for the fall of 2025, going down. The details are not really shared all that publicly yet, but going down to Montgomery to the EJI Center and the National Lynching Memorial. I'm guessing that Selma's probably going to be on that trip as well. Birmingham, which was where we have a letter from a Birmingham jail.
We're looking at, after doing research, we don't have to go totally to the south to find.
Indeed.
Yep. To go to Memphis.
Yep.
Wisconsin ranks as many say the #1 state. Look at incarceration, education.
Yep.
So we're looking maybe at a mini trip just for the set within that geographic center. So
Yep.
you don't have to go 1,400 miles.
Right.
It's very eye-opening to see what's happening here. So.
Yeah. And it's my personal hope that as a congregation we'll have a field trip to the Black Holocaust Museum, which is just in Milwaukee. And so that'll be a day trip for us, and probably late summer, early fall is kind of what I'm looking to for that. So this is work that I hope that our congregation is going to be, we've laid a wonderful foundation for this kind of work. Thank you for building on it so much. And I part of me says I'm going to miss you, but y'all are not allowed to like leave, okay? So y'all got to, well, wherever you go, you are with us. But these three are still stuck in the Green Bay area for a while, all right? So again, before we close, I want to say a word of prayer for you, okay? Good and gracious God, we give you thanks today for the St. Norbert College community, for the administration, the faculty, the staff, the students, all who are part of that blessed, beloved community right here in our midst. We thank you too for Dr. Ford's work and for his creating this Black theology class, for all of the students who are involved in it and who are sharing their learning with our sisters and brothers in Christ throughout the community. Today, we especially lift before you Taylor, Kelsey, Drew, and Joe. Thank you. Thank you for enriching St. John Lutheran Church with their presence in worship, in fellowship, in learning. Thank you for what they have shared in the past several weeks, and especially what they have shared today. Continue to bless them, Lord. Enrich their lives so that they can be faithful revelations of Jesus in all of the world, showing your love for the least of these, our siblings. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much. And I'll probably see you tomorrow.
Are you all registered to vote? Oh, yeah.